She will be investigating the bodily activities that involve or that are found within the context of typography and language. So she's coming from London, and she's a visual communication designer. Please welcome Charlotte.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I take this one?
Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Can we have the mic?
Hello? Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'm Charlotte. I'm really happy to be here, thank you. I'm a visual communicator and a PhD student at the Royal College of Art in London. And my talk is called Performativity of Written Language. And I'm just going to start explaining what I mean with that. And automatically, this is also a chronological journey through my practice. And also a journey of me getting to the bottom of my fascination for typography. So everything I'm showing is kind of work in progress, and I'm going to talk a lot about art, performance, literature, and a lot of things that don't seem to be related to typography in the first place. So my background is in visual communication. I did my BA in Düsseldorf, and which was really interdisciplinary. But looking back, you can already say two main interests in my work, which are typography and the body, and kind of perception binding both together. So for my BA final project, I did the typeface that would combine these two elements, typography and the body. So the typeface ideally got 5 cuts from readable to super abstract. And you can use the cuts individually, but the typeface is meant to be used interactively so that it changes according to type speed, and that typography would be revealed as an extension of our body. So that's an example of how this can look like. So I went to London, I did my MA at the RCA, and I went to London with this idea of written language being a gesture, and that idea that in order to explore written language itself, we have to investigate the gesture behind it. And that's why I was looking into diverse ideas of gestures and bodily performance in relation to movement and mark. Starting with that before every gesture before every mark there's always a gesture. And this is a work by Rebecca Horn, Finger Gloves, and she's extending her limbs in order to get conscious of her gestures. So she kind of feels herself grasping and touching. Then in Chinese calligraphy, and this is drawn with water, and the gesture creating the character equals the character itself. So it's almost like a meditation that is uniting body and mind, and it's not anymore about that communication, but it's more rather about the bodily expression. Then Henri Michaud, the artist, was convinced that the human body has a natural set of gestures, and that these were simply displaced by conventions. And that's why he studied different writing systems in order to decondition himself. Then the next part was about how can you reveal something about a gesture when looking at a trace. And this is a work by Cy Twombly, and he used the materials in his paintings in a way that they would persist as an object. So rather than representing something else by the form they take, they were used in a way that would show its essence. Then the art movement Cubism thematized the human body moving in space and time. So the subjects in the painting were shown from multiple viewpoints to reveal the human body as something moving and watching from different perspectives. Then in Jackson Pollock's action painting, the canvas is expanding into the space. So Pollock is rather drawing in the air than on his canvas. And the canvas is only kind of catching the remnants of that gesture. So the painting is not only painting, but rather a happening. And then Edward Muybridge, he photographed a horse in a sequence of shots in order to break down the gesture and reveal something about it. And finally, I was also looking into how a gesture, a trace can trigger new performance and gesture. And this is a dance piece by the Canadian choreographer Marie Chonard. And she took the signs from Henri Michaud, which I showed you before, and which you also see in the background. And she translated them into choreographic directions. So she used these signs as an impulse to actuate the body in a new way. So taking all this into account, how can we take this performativity of written language as a chance to create something new? So how could we translate that onto typography? And this is a workshop I did at Kingston University, and it's based on this question. So each student got one character and would perform it differently in the course of the day in order to decondition that embodied memory that would be tied to that specific character. Here you see some of the results. This was an A, for example, and this is a B. So this was about the analog gesture of writing, but our most common gesture today is the gesture of typing. And while typing, we are really unaware of a complex process, so it's equally a left and right-handed gesture. So I had this idea of doing a performative typeface that hasn't got any fixed characters, but the characters form within the process of typing. So I rendered the keyboard more flexible, and I used it kind of like a toolbox of elements, so that each character is built out of several strokes, like in handwriting, so that there's a greater capacity for participation. The next step was to break this even more down, so these are smaller elements, and the characters are built out of these elements from bottom to top and in columns from left to right. So this is an example of how an A could look like, so whether it be uppercase or lowercase, or you could, for example, bind letter shapes together, however you like. But at the same time, there's this consistent aesthetic which is binding all letter forms together. And in the next step, I challenged this tool for mark making even further by using 2 keyboards, and 2 people could perform a letter form in collaboration. And it turned out that you could not only create readable characters, but also explore new letter shapes. And this brought me to this moment where I realized I don't really want to be a type designer, because I was more interested in typefaces that went beyond semantic letter forms, and I didn't really know where to fit with this. So I found myself in this crisis of not wanting to be a type designer, but at the same time be working with nothing but type. And you should ask yourself what this man got to do with my crisis. And this is Giacometti, the sculptor. And I just recently read this article about him by Jean-Paul Sartre. And Giacometti himself was in a crisis. And the only way for him to find out of this crisis was to not only question conventions, but to ignore them and restart from scratch. And he restarted using his personal practice and approached sculpture for the first time, and he molded man without petrifying. So what I want to say with that is that we have to consider crisis as a chance to go beyond what is there. And the task of Giacometti and all other sculptors is not to add a new work to the gallery, but to open up new possibilities through the act of sculpting. And likewise for us as a type designer, it's not to create a new typeface, but to go beyond semantic content and open up new possibilities as well. So starting at point zero, I asked myself, what if language was a happening, and what does this imply? And I like the idea of a happening. A happening is something evolving out of the moment, as something not being completely planned, as something involving bodily performance, and something that isn't bound to a specific materiality or medium. So this undefined term of a happening was for me kind of a starting point to approach typography from scratch. So considering language as a happening, we have to rethink it as a material and a format. So what materiality takes language if I restart, and how do we perform it? And I began by placing the body in space using language elements and explore what it would mean to experience language. And I created this broad set of interacting with language between perception and action. So I translated these type elements into the third dimension so that you can approach it from different sides and perspectives. Then between material and immaterial, so there's augmented reality and playing with projection. And finally, between body and object, so how does language occupy space and how do we interact with it, changing from small scale to large scale up to architectural scale. And I came to the solution that we not only perform language in a sense of changing its actual physical appearance, but it's also a performance through perception. And we can again rationalize and frame this idea by looking into art history, because there are many artists who thematize the body as a core element necessary to complete their work. And this is Kurt Schwitters-Merzbau, and he used the capacity of fragments as a chance to create a new unified whole. Then Robert Morris, minimalism, and he used the changing perception of the body which is moving through the room. And finally, Jean Dubuffet, this is a work by him, and he plays with that contrast between mental images and real objects. So taking all this into account, I created this immersive language room, kind of an installation that is exploring that space between language, image, object, and architectural forms. And I also made this encyclopedia, which should kind of complete that illusion of a world that can be experienced from a pre-literate sort of childlike perspective. But that was when I realized I had to make myself free from the aesthetic of my fragmented typeface, and that's when I began experimenting with programmatic processes in order to remove this aesthetic agency away from myself. So I created 4 different web applications that are altering the process of writing into a non-decodable system. So the latter form only appears once, and after that another again. So it's kind of a disconnection of the gesture of typing from human decision making. Yeah, this is the last one, which is basically the same one that before, but the lines are now linked together. Yeah, within this computer-generated line composition, there were moments where you intuitively recognize letter forms. Yeah, these are a few examples. And this reminded me of a child learning to write. So written language is conditioning, and I wanted to look further into how we are conditioned to write, but also how we are conditioned when it comes to aesthetic and taste, and how we are sometimes caught in this as human beings. And this is a work by Gerd Richter, and he uses algorithmic processes because he's amazed of that unbiased position of the machine. And then Marcel Duchamp, who takes an ordinary object and places it on a new point of view. So he kind of breaks with that conditioning and presents the objects from a different perspective. So these objects were called objets trouvés, and they are commonplace items or piece of rubbish that are handled as an art object. And I wanted to translate that onto my computer-generated line composition, saying a long trouvé is a computer-generated non-semantic form that is handled and performed as written language. So what I did is I took these computer-generated sounds and performed them as if they were actual writing. And I like the idea of actually learning a typeface that hasn't got any cultural context. So these are a few learning sheets I made, but I realized it made it quickly become habitual. And Philip Flusser says writing becomes almost mysterious if we discover it by deliberate consideration. And I wanted to reveal this mysterious in writing and communicate this active experience of the gesture of writing and the act of learning writing for the first time. And that's why I copied the aesthetic of a digital learning program. So each sign would be generated in a second, and you got one chance to trace the form right before it gets lost and before it's becoming a habit. And then these paper printouts are, so that's the installation how it looks like, and the paper printouts are the only witness of that dialogue between form and performance. And I want to end up with this, and this is a quote by Umberto Eco, and he says, "Our universe is in full crisis, and that the order of words no longer corresponds to the order of things." So I think we have to consider the crisis of our world as a chance to look beyond what is there, and we shouldn't not only question conventions, but maybe sometimes ignore them and really think in utopias. And maybe we should stop working as type designers and start performing type differently. Thank you very much.